What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and it's been a while. I had to literally dust off the camera, figure out the lighting setup again, get the camera angle all good to go, but it's been about a month since we last recorded a video, and I'm happy to step out of the darkness. It's March, and over this weekend, we had the NFL Combine. Players lined up, ran the 40-yard dash, got weighed in, hand size, measurables, a lot of new data and new information for this 2025 rookie class. And I couldn't help myself but to hop on here and give you guys some of my thoughts from the NFL Combine, talk about some winners, some losers, guys skyrocketing up my rookie rankings, all of that good stuff, because the NFL Combine absolutely does matter, and it's information we should adjust for. I see a lot of people out there on Twitter or wherever you can talk about fantasy football, and like the cool take right now is that, oh, well, the NFL Combine doesn't matter. Now, of course, the NFL Combine has varying differences or varying magnitudes of which it matters for each position, but it still absolutely does matter. Now, before we even talk about the players, what happened over the weekend, let's talk about why the NFL Combine does matter and why you should care about it. First up, we have my prospect models, the RS grading system. Now, I will say, the reason I haven't been on here or making videos is the last month or so, I've been deep in the Google Sheets making the RS Grades 2.0. Now, I don't know if that's what it's going to be called, but there are definitely some inherent flaws. Like, as you get older, you get more years under your belt. That was my first run at a prospect model in 2022. So now it's been 2 years since then. I just want to update it, make it better. There's some ideas I had for how it could be a smoother, better overall piece of content. One thing being that it goes all the way back to 2007. We're in the COVID NIL era, comparing guys from 07 like Calvin Johnson to guys like Malik Neighbors in 2024. There's some context that I don't think you can capture fully. So we're going to bring it up to like 2017, 2018, use newer metrics like yards per out run. It's going to be really, really cool. The wide receiver model should be done by the end of next week, and I should have like a wide receiver rankings video going over how that works. Now, the old grades are still fine, and you can see here the varying degrees of what matters. This is just the percentage of the model that athletic metrics take up in the RS grading system. For tight ends, you have relative athletic score, which is just a composite grade from Kent Lee Platt, ras.football, I think is the link for it. But it just takes into account your size, your speed, explosion, agility, and it spits out an RAS, speed score, weight adjusted speed, agility score is just your agility drills. That stuff really matters at tight end. You have guys like George Kittle who crushed that, size speed guys like Gronkowski, Kelsey, across the board. Testing really, really matters at tight end. Then at running back, RAS speed score is 18% of the model, 28% for the tight ends, 14% for quarterbacks. You'd be surprised. Hand size is kind of solid for quarterbacks. Guys who had over 10-inch hands, so like those are mitts. Herbert, Luck, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Josh Allen, all 10-inch plus hands. And the guys with really tiny hands, like sub 9 inches, that's going to be Kenny Pickett. Then for wide receiver, it matters the least. But even at wide receiver, it still matters a decent bit, and here's why. Now, I wanted to also cover, well, if you don't care about the prospect model at all, you're like, well, I don't care about your RS grades, which is actually perfectly fair. If you don't care about my prospect model, whatever. But the NFL Combine matters for fantasy, and Ryan Heath here proved why. He is one of the best up-and-coming analysts, podcast or whatever in fantasy sports. He's over on Fantasy Points. He is absolutely amazing. And he wrote an article very recently talking about the NFL Combine, running everything through correlation and just sort of seeing what actually matters for fantasy football. Now, when you look at the wide receiver position through his article, inherently the metrics themselves don't matter a ton, right? You can see the correlation for production is all very low across the board, like 0.05. That's really not a high number, but you can see speed score 40-yard dash gives us some signal for draft capital. And draft capital really matters. When we talk about what actually matters in fantasy football in terms of modeling, draft capital is our North Star. It is the best metric out there because if a player gets drafted highly, right? Jamar Chase in the top 10, Malik Neighbors in the top 10, a lot of good. Now, of course, it's not perfect, right? Like Kevin White was a top 10 pick as well, but across an entire sample, how early a player gets drafted, they'll get more volume, they'll score more points in fantasy football. It's one of the best indicators we have. And if we can get in March a better idea of where a player gets drafted, that's very valuable information, right? Last year we had Xavier Worthy, blazed the combine, right? He breaks the record. And you can see here from his expected draft capital from grinding the mocks, which is a chart just kind of showing where he was getting mocked. He was kind of like a fringe round two pick, actually declining a little bit. And then the combine happens in March, and he skyrockets up into the first round, becomes a first round pick. And that's a big deal. If we can get players that we know are going to be first round picks, that's a massive edge in fantasy football. You can see here from Nick Ercolano, he had a tweet over the last 3 years, wide receivers taken in rounds 2 through 3. Of course, you have good players like Pickens, Nico Collins, T. Higgins, Pittman, but it's a lot of like pretty brutal names, right? Devin Duvernay, Bryan Edwards in terms of like round 2, 3 guys, Josh Palmer, Diami Brown, Christian Watson, Alec Pierce, Sky Moore. If you can get into the round 1 area, that boosts your expected point per game output a ton. So that is good information. If a wide receiver tests well, they'll get drafted higher, and then in turn, higher draft capital is a higher implied production in their near future. Now, in terms of like what actually matters for projecting production, running backs actually matter a good bit in terms of their combine. Now, not even just for production, but also for draft capital like wide receivers. And this is what we're going to start talking about this class here. Now, when we talk about running backs, it's important to view it through this lens with the combine, right? If we go back to 2022, we had a running back class with Isaiah Spiller, Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall. At that point in time, it really was not crazy to talk about Isaiah Spiller as the RB1 in the class, as the top dog in the class. And then the NFL Combine happens, and Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker run sub 4.4. Isaiah Spiller is slow. He goes on day 3, never heard of again. And Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall go on day 2 and kind of rise into the top 12 conversation in Dynasty. So when we talk about the Combine, it definitely solidifies where these players get drafted, right? And this is a really good look at this from that Ryan Heath article, where speed score is absolutely huge for projecting draft capital. And again, we care about draft capital for this reason. You can see this here. It's just the relationship between draft capital since 2007 and a running back's points per game in their first 3 years. 0.377 R squared for a sample that are people, humans, tough to predict. It's a really good signal. So again, if we can get something that keys us in on draft capital this far out in March, when the draft happens late April, that's a huge edge on our opponents. And we can tell the biggest North Star towards draft capital is speed score. And what that brings us to is finally the 2025 class. So these are your 2025 draft group of running backs. Now, I will say I don't have every single combine invite on this list. There might be a running back or two left out, but it should be most of them that we care about. And I sorted them by speed score, which is, again, just a size-adjusted 40-yard dash. So it takes your weight, takes your 40-yard dash into account, and then you can see, okay, here's everybody's speed scores. And as we know, the higher the speed score, the better implied draft capital you should be getting. So what does that tell us off the rip in terms of winners and losers? Well, at the top, I would say definitely what we can look at here is the top-end running backs of Omarion Hampton, Trevion Henderson, and Quinshon Judkins, all huge winners because Omarion Hampton and Trevion Henderson were already in the round 1 conversation. This speed score for Omarion Hampton of 110 plus, right, 111.7 is really, really strong. He is now in the back-end RB1 conversation and a lock to go in round 2. You can talk about Quinshon Judkins as well. I would say that the same thing for him. He can flirt with back-end round 1 draft capital, probably a lock to go in round 2. And then Trevion Henderson a little bit lower in terms of speed score, but still pretty damn good. 4.43 speed at 202 pounds. And I think now after Ashton Genty, we have a clear tier of 3 running backs, Hampton, Judkins, and Trevion Henderson. Now, if we look at their relative athletic scores, we can go to, here it is. But we can go to Kent Lee Platt or at MathBomb on Twitter, and we can see how these guys grade out. And you can see here, Hampton, 5'11", 221 pounds, 4.4 speed, elite explosion. He looks great. You have Quinshon Judkins as well, 221 pounds, having elite explosion and 4.4 speed is amazing as well. And then Trevion Henderson, smaller back at 5'10", 202 pounds, but same idea, great speed, elite explosion. So all 3 of these guys are now, to me, locks to go round 1 or 2, which is massive. We can talk about Genty round 1 or 2 of those 3 running backs in round 1 as well, and another 2 or 3 in round 2. That's really, really good. That's when you can start comparing this draft class to something like, not 2017, because 2017 is so crazy, but 2018, where it not only had Saquon at the top, but it had like Nick Chubb and some other guys in that class as well that I can't think of off the top of my head. And you can talk about the Jonathan Taylor class with Jonathan Taylor. It was better at the time with DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, but just in terms of running backs getting draft capital and holding value for Dynasty, that's what we're working with. Now, the important thing to note here with these speed scores up top is that the draft capital is projected, right? So Marion Hampton, 236 in terms of draft round and draft pick. That's just projections, and they were pre-combine projections. So crushing the combine should move up those projected draft capital numbers. Now, I wanted to also mention that when we talk about draft capital and why we care about draft capital is, of course, the Ryan Heath stuff. But if you can go from round 2 to round 1 in terms of draft capital, you go from 9.39 points per game in your first 3 seasons to 13. So moving up every single round matters. This is data going back to 2007. Now, the discrepancy between round 2 and round 3 isn't that massive, but in recent years, it definitely has mattered a bit more, where your round 3 guys are kind of like Keyshawn Vaughn and Brian Robinson and Tyrion Davis-Price, whereas round 2 has been a little bit more solid. So like we talked about with the RS grades, I'm going to be updating it to more recent. We can kind of see how those trends affect things. But moving up your draft capital in any increment like this does absolutely matter. So I do want to keep this here so you can see as we talk about these next couple of running backs, because these are the ones that are important, right? If they can make the jump, like Henderson, Hampton, Judkins, these are guys who are winners from the combine and are looking to maybe flirt with back-end round 1 draft capital. But when we talk about these other guys in terms of the winners, like, man, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, Biashal Tootin. But he is somebody, right, where you can see at the top, 118.3 speed score, the best speed score in the class by far, and he was already projected to go in the 4th round pre-combine. So if he can sneak into the 3rd round, right, and we're looking at here, that's a big deal, right? You go from, 5.58 points per game through your first 3 seasons up to 9.11. And if the speed score just did that for him, that's a massive jump in expected production. And for Tootin, a little undersized at 5'9", 206, but that's still, in the modern NFL, that's absolutely fine. 4.32 speed, 40-inch vertical. Like, he almost looks like I don't know if I want to say poor man's Devon Achane, but that's similar speed and explosion to Achane at like 10 more pounds. So that's absolutely massive. He's this guy who went to Virginia Tech, freak athlete, can catch passes, can kind of do it all. A lot of the film guys absolutely love him. And we can also talk about some other guys flirting with day 2 draft capital. When I say day 2, that's round 2, round 3. Giddens right now I have him projected for 4th round draft capital. He hits 110.6 speed score. Another really good time here. 212 pounds, 4.4 speed, elite explosion grade as well. So he's a big winner as someone that can maybe slip into that round 3 area. Same thing with Rocket Raheem Sanders. He is somebody that I've had in Devy since he was a freshman. He went to Arkansas, transfers to South Carolina. Really good early career, rough back-end career, but he was somebody, he's like, 217 pounds, 6 feet tall. He played wide receiver in high school. Really good all-around receiving threat, good size, 4.4 speed, pretty decent vertical here at 36.5 inches as well. And then our final 2 winners here at the RB position, RJ Harvey, 205 pounds, but 5'8", so he's compact, which is nice, right? His BMI would be better than this poor size grade, but he has 4.4 speed, elite explosion. Somebody else, right, where I have him projected as a 4th round pick, he could absolutely slip into round 3 as well. And then we'll talk about a dart throw here that I don't have a picture for, but you can see at the top of this list, right below Tootin, is Montrell Johnson. He's not quite Isaiah Guerendo, because Isaiah Guerendo, 220 pounds, 4.3 speed, crazy monster. But Montrell Johnson is like a poor man's Guerendo in the fact that right now he's a 7th round projection. This should get him drafted, weighing in 212 pounds, running a 4.4. It should get him drafted at least, but like Guerendo, he was never a workhorse in college. He never had over 1,000 rushing yards, but he did like bounce around. He went to Florida. Decent production, but the measurables are what a team would be drafting him for, and you could see how that happens. Now, in terms of the running back losers, we're going to talk about each position group, winners, losers at each position. So let's move to Caleb Johnson, one of the losers from this class. Now, I will say, he's not a massive loser, okay? Like, there's definitely degrees to losing at the NFL Combine. he just, to me, I think it's very clear now. It's Genty, tier 1. Tier 2 is in whatever order you want. Hampton and the 2 Ohio State running backs. And then small tier break to Caleb Johnson, who to me is now no longer in the conversation of a round 1 pick. I'd say now he's like a round 2 or 3 guy, which is fine. But again, a small tier break because he doesn't have the upside to be a round 1 pick. He comes in at 224 pounds, runs a 4.57. That's not terrible, right? When we look at the speed score from earlier, he comes in below Trevor Etienne with a 102.7. It's not great. It's not terrible, but it's not the same kind of testing of like 4.4 speed of the other guys. He doesn't have the pedigree of a Trevion Henderson, where Henderson comes in a little bit smaller, so the speed score is lower, but he went to Ohio State, big-time recruit, huge freshman season. Caleb Johnson out of Iowa is a little bit different to me as well. But when we look at day 2 running backs, so round 2 and 3 running backs that have this, 220-plus pounds, 4.5-plus type of speed, it's not a terrible list, right? You have Le'Veon Bell, Nick Chubb, James Conner, Carlos Hyde, Eddie Lacy, who was really sick before he couldn't, get his weight down. David Montgomery's in here. Jeremy Hill had his time. Ty Montgomery had his time. So it's not terrible, but it's also not super sexy. Where if I pulled this up for Hampton or Judkins, we're looking at like, Jonathan Taylor and a bunch of like size, Saquon Barkley, like size speed kind of freaks. It's not the same kind of range, but I think he could still be a fine contributor. So he's like a loser, but I would say lowercase L. I would say a bigger loser is probably Ollie Gordon, where if we look at Ollie Gordon, sadly, he reminds me a lot of Chuba Hubbard. So he can still work out on day 3, but he came into the combine with a lot to gain, right? Where if he could come out here, go crazy, pop off, he goes from a day 3 pick to a round 3, round 2 pick. And again, that matters a ton when we talk about fantasy scoring at the running back position. I'm trying to just pull that up again here. Yeah. So it matters a ton, right? And he was somebody, he came off an All-American season, 1,700 rushing yards, 22 total touchdowns at Oklahoma State as a sophomore. He was like the preseason, he was in conversation for RB1. It was him and Genty in terms of the RB1 in this class. If you wanted to talk about somebody that wasn't at an Ohio State, he was up there in terms of like Devy circles. But this year, he doesn't hit 1,000 rushing yards. He's now looking at day 3 draft capital. And then to go with that, he runs a 4.61. It's not a death sentence, but if he could have come out here at 226 pounds and ran in the 4.4s or like low 4.5s, we're talking about a guy that could sneak into round 3. I think now he's probably locked into day 3 draft capital, which is disappointing, right? Again, if he runs faster, he probably has a better outlook for that potential draft capital. Now, let's talk about the tight ends. And again, when we look at the prospect model stuff, the tight ends matter the most. 28% of the prospect model goes to athleticism at tight end, but the reason we didn't lead off with tight end, because it matters there the most, even though running back matters a good bit as well, a lot of them didn't test, right? Loveland didn't test. Warren didn't test. Arroyo didn't test. Mason Taylor didn't test. A lot of them didn't go out there and run, but it does matter a ton, right? You can see the prospect model. You can also see this from the guy who created RAS himself, Kent Lee Platt here, where he talks about only one tight end that's hit 750 yards in a season with an RAS under 5. Jordan Reed, obviously an absolute stud, but you need to be athletic to score fantasy points at tight end. Now, I will say one of the winners at tight end, we'll talk about the winners first, of course. We'll talk about Colston Loveland. Now, he didn't test or anything, but his size was really solid. It was better than we had thought. He is somebody where right now, like the biggest thing to be afraid of with the tight end position, and we see it a lot with a guy like Dalton Kincaid, and we're kind of seeing the tweener move tight end get phased out a little, where you need to be this complete package at tight end, like a Trey McBride, Hawkinson, Kittle, guys who can block, guys who can play in line, guys who can be complete receivers. Because right now, personnel is getting heavier. The running game is huge, right? We just saw with the Eagles running the ball, Dallas Goedert as well, a bigger inline type of tight end, is because why have a tight end, right? Like Kyle Pitts failing as well. I put Kyle Pitts and Dalton Kincaid as a big, I guess you'd call it like a canary in the coal mine of this archetype of tight end is kind of struggling right now, where if a tight end can't block in line, you might as well just have a slot wide receiver out there for him, right? Like the Khalil Shakir versus Dalton Kincaid dilemma where we saw in the playoffs, they leaned on Shakir much more, and Kincaid kind of struggled. So, and you saw that in Atlanta as well with Ray McLeod versus Kyle Pitts. We saw it before then with Jonnu Smith versus Kyle Pitts. Just kind of in a modern NFL where we're seeing a lot more heavy packages, a lot more running of the football, that this like tweener tight end that's like 6'3", 230 pounds, just doesn't really work. And that was the concern for Loveland, that he could come in, weigh in light, come in short. A lot of these schools, they fudge the numbers. They put him in 2 inches up, 10 pounds plus. But he comes in here, and for a guy who's seen as the like smaller tweener tight end between him and Warren, where Warren's this complete package, tough, physical blocks, they're not that different in terms of size, right? He comes in actually taller than Tyler Warren. He comes in with bigger hands, 10 inches, 248 pounds. So 6'5", 248 pounds, that'll absolutely play. Where he goes from being this like Evan Ingram, right? He's fine. He's done his thing in the NFL, but he's the outlier. Everyone that looks like Evan Ingram at tight end usually struggles in the NFL. But Loveland now comes into this range of, if we look at guys that are kind of in this area of, height, that's 77 inches. So that's like 6'5", 250-ish pounds. Ertz, Hawkinson, Julius Thomas, Tyler Eifert, Jared Cook, O.J. Howard, Hunter Henry, Pat Freiermuth. Of course, I don't know. You can filter things however you want to get studs in there, but those are a fine archetype of tight end that can play inline, play everywhere, have enough size to not get like bullied around, and to get used correctly for fantasy football, where you don't have to like run him off the field. Now, film guys might come out and say, well, he needs to block better, this, and that. Michigan did run the ball a ton. I assume that he's not a complete zero in that aspect of his game. And then a really big winner, I'd say the biggest winner at tight end, maybe even the biggest winner of the combine, or one of the biggest winners, Terrence Ferguson. Shout out to Faraz. He was somebody that got talked about a ton at the Senior Bowl out of Oregon. Tight end Terrence Ferguson. And the Senior Bowl matters. Teams show up. Guys who do well, they get drafted higher. He was one of the talks of the town at the Senior Bowl. And then he comes out here and he tests really well. He comes in at 6'5", 247 pounds, and looks kind of like Tyler Eifert. A bit of a throwback, but Tyler Eifert was a fun tight end until injuries caught up to him. Comes in at 6'5", Terrence Ferguson, 247 pounds, which isn't the best, but, Eifert was 250. Anything in that like 250-ish range isn't terrible at all. 4.6 speed, 39-inch vertical. He crushed everything. Now, we would like to see an agility score. I'd like to see him run the shuttle, do the 3-cone. But for what we have right now in terms of size, speed, he qualifies as a big winner. He was also, in terms of my projected draft capital I had for him, was 4th round by consensus. This is something that could get him into the day 2 conversation, which again, for most positions, draft capital is king. So if you can improve from a day 3 pick to a day 2 pick with the combine, that's a big deal in my eyes. And then the last winner we have at tight end, right? So we have Colson Loveland, we have Terrence Ferguson, and we have someone I wasn't even really familiar with, and this is kind of more of a Moneyball style guy. We have Jalen Conyers, and I say Moneyball because he's like a 7th round projected pick, but he at 260 pounds, 6'3", a little bit short, but he is big. 4.7, 440 is not amazing, but at 260 pounds, that's still a fine speed score, 9.24 RAS, and his agility times for that size are nuts, right? 4.27 shuttle, 6.94 3-cone. Ryan Heath talks about it in this tweet as well, where you can see fastest combine 3-cone time since 2010 among tight ends drafted at 260 or more pounds. Jimmy Graham, then Jalen Conyers. That's pretty dang good. Now, of course, the rest of these guys, Tip Ryman, Michael Roberts, Jermaine Gresham, Will Dissly, not like an amazing group, but he added below, it should be noted, Roberts and Raymond were 270 plus, which gives them a big dock in our fantasy-focused Spork model, where those guys were almost so big they're just considered blockers, which is actually a really good note for him. It's something that I'm going to be implementing in my prospect model, where I think a mistake we had one year was overrating Darnell Washington, this physical freak. You want to draft freaks at tight end, but he was so heavy that he was always destined to be more of a blocker anyways, which I think was a oversight on my part. But Jalen Conyers, 260 on the nose. Decent production. He had like one season of like over 400 receiving yards. At tight end, it's not a big deal. Like I see people really going out of their way to like look at breakout age or yards per out run and all that at tight end. They matter. But again, when 28% of the model is athleticism, and then another big chunk is draft capital. Production, like on the other side of that, right, where like tight end matters the most in terms of athletic testing, production matters the least. So I can look past that. He's someone that's more of like a dart throw in the later rounds, but Jalen Conyers, someone who definitely was a winner at the combine. Now, in terms of losers at tight end, we sadly have somebody that I've kind of fallen in love with over this offseason, and it's really just because he put up a season I've never seen in my life at tight end. Harold Fannin Jr., man. Harold Fannin Jr., just absolutely nut stuff from a production standpoint. But again, as I just said, production at tight end is probably overrated. There was a guy that my Jets once drafted, I think third-round pick, Jace Amaro. He had 1,300-plus receiving yards at Texas Tech, and it didn't matter, right? If you're not athletic, if you can't move well, if you're not good, if you're not like a special athlete at tight end, it really does matter. Very rarely do those guys pan out and work well. Now, Harold Fannin Jr., he didn't test horribly. Comes in 241 pounds, 6'3". That's not awful, but that puts him in that tweener Evan Ingram area. And Evan Ingram runs a 4.4. Fannin runs a 4.71. And if you want to talk about, okay, well, maybe not Ingram, but maybe Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith ran a 4.6, and he had better vertical, better broad jump, better shuttle. I guess Fannin got him in the 3-cone. 6.97 3-cone is actually really, really good for Fannin. Maybe he can win on the short area quickness stuff, but when we talk about him, again, the reason why I liked him a ton is his stats were just absolutely, I mean, I've never seen a season like this from a tight end in my life. Brock Bowers, amazing tight end. And I'm not saying Harold Fannin Jr. is better. Of course, he's at Bowling Green, whatever. Brock Bowers never had over 1,000 receiving yards. Harold Fannin had 117 receptions, over 1,500 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns at Bowling Green in 13 games as an All-American. And if you want to say, well, he was playing at Bowling Green, he put up, let me see, his game log is just silly, man. Like, it is ridiculous. And against Penn State, he had 11 catches, 137 yards, and a touchdown versus Penn State. So he was someone I was excited about, but as I just said, he needed to test really well. Because now he goes from somebody that's like a priority target in like the second round of rookie drafts to now more of a late round dart throw. I'll be happy with him as a dart throw, but I think now teams might not draft him as highly. Teams are sort of across the board on like whether or not he can play tight end, whether he's an H-back. We had that issue as well with Ben Sinnott last year. Was he an H-back? Was he a tight end? He didn't really get a bunch of usage. So Fannin has a lot of issues when it comes to that. And if you want to look at kind of like what he comps to, and my bad for like drinking water a ton. I haven't done this in a while. 1 and 2, my allergies are honestly killing me. But this is, I know it's like a massive data sample, but these are tight ends who were under 6'5", under 250 pounds, and under a 100 speed score. Harold Fannin came in at, again, 6'3", 241 pounds, 4'7", 140. That gave him a 96.47 speed score. It's not a good list, man. It's Jordan Reed, Jermichael Finley, Fred Davis. Those are your hits since 2007. Then you get like Greg Dulcich. There's really nothing else, man. Noah Gray's been decent. People want to comp him to Isaiah Likely, but Isaiah Likely is much taller, which matters for jump ball situations at tight end. He has an uphill battle to hit in the NFL is really what I'm trying to paint the picture of here. Now, our final loser at tight end is going to be Gunnar Helm. He was somebody I was excited about. Good production at Texas in a stacked wide receiver room of Matthew Golden, of Isaiah Bond. They have a freshman who's really good, Ryan Wingo, as well. He comes out here 4'8'3", 241 pounds, so he's light. He's not fast, which was shocking to me because he's actually, I don't watch film per se. I watch a little bit. I watch a lot of college football. He looked like a much better mover than that. Now, I will say, he has an asterisk next to him as a loser of the combine because he sprained his ankle on the 40. I remember watching the 40. I remember watching him run the 40, and he stumbled out the gate. It was like very weird. It was very awkward. His first time was like 4.93. And I was like, there's just no way. Like, something was awkward there. Now, of course, we get these pictures, which, dude, I don't like. I might get like demonetized on YouTube for that picture, but he sprained his ankle really, really bad. You can see it there. It's like all swollen, whatever. I should have maybe given him more of like a heads up to you guys as I showed that picture, but you get the deal. Maybe he's going to go at the pro day. Like, so he's somebody asterisk until the pro day. If he comes out on the pro day and he runs in the 4.7s or 4.6s, huge W. If he can't do better than a, let's actually just scroll back down. If he can't do better than a 2.23 RAS, when we know that we need to have 5+ to hit 750+ yard seasons, he's pretty much donezo, and he's going to get drafted much lower for that as well. If he can run in the 4.6s at his pro day, 4.7s at his pro day, he's definitely looking at like a day 2 type of draft capital idea there. It was just funny. Like, I don't know if I'd rather sprain my ankle on my start and then like just bow out and look like a wimp, where it's like, no, I'm not even going to run it, man. Like, I'm all good. Or you tough through it and you potentially sacrifice tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands dollars because you couldn't put your pride to the side and you ran on a sprained ankle. So who knows? Adrenaline was probably pumping. He probably didn't even really know what happened. But let's talk about the wide receivers. Now, of course, the big disclaimer is that the combine doesn't matter a ton for wide receivers in terms of production, but it does matter for where they get drafted. And again, draft capital is signal for production. So it's like kind of this weird paradox of how that works. Now, this is a good tweet from Scott Barrett that just kind of shows you top 30 fastest wide receivers in NFL Combine history. 8 of them are round 1 picks, only one 1,000-yard wide receiver. So definitely something to sort of keep in mind when it comes to, okay, well, a faster player gets drafted higher, that maybe they're getting overdrafted by the NFL. But to me, that draft capital still matters just for the overall strength of the class and what we're looking at as a whole. I do think in the future we're going to see things get maybe better. Worthy looked pretty promising last year. And I do think Henry Ruggs would have been solid if not for the weird situation that he had. Now, the biggest winner to me among wide receivers is Matthew Golden. He runs a 4.29, fastest wide receiver at the Combine, and he comes out blazes, and we get reports like this. He was like a fringe round 1 wide receiver out of Texas coming in. It now seems like he's not only a lock to go first round, but Mike Tannenbaum is over here touting that he might be the first wide receiver off the board. I'm not saying he should be. I don't have him over Tet or Emeka Egbuka, but him locking in round 1 draft capital. This is a chart for wide receivers. We did running backs earlier. If you can lock in round 1 draft capital, your expected points per game through your first 3 seasons in the first round, 10.7. That's pretty dang good. So that's a big deal, right? Locking in round 1, potentially being a top 20 pick instead of like a someone that could have felt like the pick 50, pick 40. That improves your implied hit rate a ton. So big winner for Matthew Golden. He was on the round 1 fringes. I think now he's probably locked in at like top 20, top 25 because he ran so fast. We'll also say a winner is Luther Burden, someone that is very divided in terms of how people feel about him. He's someone I'll be digging into as we sort of build out this wide receiver model of how to sort of handle his weird production, his up and down, his usage of being in the slot, a lot of screens, a lot of sort of like Mickey Mouse routes, but 4.4 speed, 6 feet tall, 206 pounds, kind of that like compact, sort of this modern DJ Moore style wide receiver. And to me, that's really good. Like, that'll play. That's perfect. He comes in at a good size. He comes in at a good speed. Would we like to see maybe explosiveness or agility? Sure. But to me, lowercase w for Luther Burden. We'll talk about Alec Ayomanor as well. Now, the old RS grades, absolutely love this guy. Have him in the same tier as a gold with Emeka Egbuka and Matthew Golden, despite sort of being viewed as a tier behind those guys. Really solid. He didn't play as a freshman. His sophomore and junior year, he looked great. He actually had I think it was a play either this year or last year where he like mosses Travis Hunter. He's a really solid player. And then he comes out here and gives you 4.47 speed, elite explosion, over 6 foot, 206 pounds, all perfect. Some people see him as like a nice, like big slot style receiver, as like an Amon-Ra St. Brown type. I've seen that comp. We'll see, but he is somebody I really like, and I would call him a winner from the Combine. Now, he goes from someone that's like a day 2 mix guy to me now probably being a lock to go in the second round, maybe even better than that. We'll see. And then we'll talk about the Iowa State wide receivers. Now, you can actually mention a lot of receivers here, but again, it doesn't matter a ton. It just kind of matters for the separation, right? We have like a huge tier of wide receivers, right? From, I can't even list them all, right? But you have like Restrepo, you have Tez Johnson, you have Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, Jalen Royals. You have a massive, massive list of names, and I think the way that teams are probably going to be are going to be breaking ties in that huge tier is for athleticism. So I do want to shout out the Iowa State receivers. First, we have Jaden Higgins, who, you know, don't get too crazy, but in terms of like a round 3 receiver with crazy athleticism, he looks sort of similar to Nico Collins at like 6'4", 214 pounds, 4.4 speed, 39-inch vertical. Good broad jump, but again, when it comes to wide receiver, a lot of guys look like this, right? This could be in another alternate universe. Miles Boykin, it could be Devontae Parker. So it's not a lock that he's going to be good, but I think it's a lock that he goes on day 2. Same thing with his counterpart at Iowa State, someone that's a little bit smaller in terms of archetype, but Jalen Noel to me, is a big winner as well. Comes in at 5'10", 194 pounds. But if you're going to weigh in at 194 pounds, running a 4.39 definitely helps. Elite explosion, great agility, really good overall RAS, 9.58. He should be a lock to go day 2. And then some other guys that stood out to me was Jalen Royals. Let's actually pull up that 40-time list real quick so we can see. Dante Thornton did well, but he's like sort of day 3 fringe type of guy. Did anything else stick out? I guess like Isaiah Bond is fine. I guess he's like a loser because he promised a 4-1, but he should be absolutely fine. There's a ton of receivers you could say are like winners because they probably locked in day 2 draft capital from the combine. Someone who didn't, and someone I think is going to fall from that day 2 cluster to probably more like a day 3 guy is the one loser at wide receiver. You guys probably know who this is. Tez Johnson. This is every wide receiver in my database since 2007 that is under 170 pounds, and I have their 40-yard dash time, their BMI, their RAS, and you can see Tez Johnson, where he falls in terms of fastest 40 time, is the second slowest in front of just Terrence Austin, who I couldn't tell you who that even is. Yes, Tank Dell ran a 4.49 and is like kind of in that same area, but he did have 165 pounds. He was more compact, right? 25.1 BMI, where he's like 5'8", 165 pounds, versus Tez Johnson's 5'9", maybe 5'10", 154 pounds. The lowest BMI in my database, the lowest weight in my database, 154. And if you're going to come in that slight and not run in the 4.3s, that's really tough. Now, he did give you an elite agility time, and that's nice, but I think that this probably drops him into day 3, and that's going to be a really tough hit rate bucket to climb yourself out of in that range. So he goes from someone that's like a fun, darling player in like the late second round of rookie drafts to probably more of a dart throw at absolute best. And then at quarterback, we have winners. We don't have any losers. Like no one really tested or anything. It's just like a weird story from the weekend, but Jalen Milroe is my only winner. It's a small lowercase W. He went, I don't know how this works, man. I don't know how this works. I don't know what pills he's taken. I don't know what apparatuses he's using, but he goes from 8 3/4 hand size to 9 3/8. And the reason that's a big deal is because if you look at the quarterbacks that have under 9-inch hands, it's pretty brutal. It's Kenny Pickett. And I talked about it earlier, but to me, hand size just kind of signals like the idea of like tools, right? Like a guy like Josh Allen, where they're big, fast, strong, massive hands. It just kind of all falls in line with that, right? Again, I talked about it in the beginning, but Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, Andrew Luck, a lot of these big, toolsy quarterbacks, they have massive hands. And it's not to say that you need massive hands to do well in the NFL, but you gotta 9 inches plus is like the threshold you have to hit, really. So him going from less than 9 to well above 9 is great. Now, I think that there's probably like some fudge numbers there, but if you take the average of both of them, it's over 9, which is fine. He's now, he goes from being like an outlier at quarterback to being just fine in the mix. We'll see where he gets drafted or whatever, but I think him coming in at above 9 inches in terms of his hands is good. Now, how this happens, again, I don't know how. I have to assume the Senior Bowl did a poor job of like sticking the ruler between. I don't know. I wish I had a better answer for how that happens, but that is going to do it for us today. It felt good to get back on the mic. I'm sorry if things felt choppy or, I'm still sort of we're getting back into the swing of things. I think we might, don't hold me to it. I might do a post-combine Superflex rankings video tomorrow, like a tier list where I talk through just kind of like the updated landscape, top 24 after the combine. We'll see. And then back to the spreadsheets, and then end of next week, I should have the wide receiver model video. And then kind of the plan is to sort of churn. I think the running back and wide receiver models will definitely be done this offseason. And the ideal would be to have both done by the end of March. And then we can just devote all our time back into videos. That's kind of the issue right now. So I'm like splitting time between either making videos or grinding in my spreadsheets. You guys know I'm a freak in the sheets. I do love it. But that's going to do it for us today. I said that again. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new. And I will say as well, make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Ron. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000 to use on the app. Over the next 2 days, you get a free pick in the Pick'em lobby with LeBron James higher than 0.5 points. Come on now. Where you can kind of string together. You can look at college basketball. They have so much, and I'm so hyped for March. You guys will know. We'll probably do, actually, who am I kidding? We will 100% do a March Madness style video where I just talk about like the brackets, like kind of the not Moneyball, but, you know, kind of like the hack of looking at implied picks and all of that at March brackets, all of that good stuff. But check out Underdog Fantasy. Subscribe if you're new. Leave a like. It's March. We're back in the mix on the channel. As always, appreciate you guys. Love y'all. And I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm